I'm joined by Yahoo senior NBA writer Jake Fischer, author of Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever, and co-host of the No Cap Room podcast with another friend of the program, Dan Devine. Follow him on Twitter at Jake L. Fischer for all your free agency news. Hello and welcome to Jake Fischer. What's going on, man?
How you doing?
We're doing okay over here in Toronto. We're going to start with the Toronto Raptors news, which I know no other podcast bringing you on right now is opening with what's happening with Bruce Brown. Where's Gary Trent Jr. going? Are the Raptors going to maybe jump in on Andrew Wiggins or Cam Johnson? But
I'm gonna send a Bruce Brown text right now because I haven't checked on that in a little while. Let's see.
Okay, all right. Maybe at the end of this episode we'll get a Bruce Brown update. But no, seriously, is there anything with the Toronto Raptors? Because we're through about like 12 hours of free agency right now with Toronto, and we haven't seen anything really, even just linking the Raptors to any sort of transactions.
Yeah, Bruce definitely expects to be traded without a doubt, and there's teams that I think we've known, that we've reported, that are still kind of looking at him. Like one team, Milwaukee, that definitely had him on their list. When Milwaukee was trying to figure out how to get any type of perimeter defender with a wide range of salaries, as big as, combining Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis for stuff, like he was on their list. So that's a name I've heard for him for sure. There was a thing possible, I believe, that could have been a sign and trade with Patrick Williams if Patrick Williams did not leave Chicago.
Interesting.
Patrick Williams, I had that Toronto interest confirmed, and the number he ended up signing was around 18 AAV, I think, in Chicago. That would have been, I believe, within the parameters of the CBA's allowance of sign and trade stuff. Outside of that, it's been quiet. I heard someone suggest another team in the Eastern Conference yesterday, but I don't have that confirmed, so I don't want to say that because I don't want to mislead your loyal listeners. But outside of that, it's been quiet. I mean, there's been some Jakob Poeltl inbound trade interest.
Okay.
Definitely know Memphis called about him either before the draft or during the draft or what have you. Mm-hmm. There was definitely some Thunder talk about him as well, but obviously they went and just signed Isaiah Hartenstein. So that's really all I have. And the other part of that is that I was told the Raptors' asking price on Jakob was pretty high, considering that they traded an unprotected first, right? It was to get him. So that's my quick off the dome notebook dump on the Toronto Raptors.
So first off, appreciate you, because this will be aggregated in 16 different ways, despite there not being actually that much action happening. I saw your report about Memphis's interest in Jakob, because that would have been really interesting. Because if they had flipped it to Memphis, let's say for the 9th pick, I don't think Memphis necessarily would have given that up. That would have been essentially reversing the Jakob Poeltl trade, which ended up being the 8th pick that went to San Antonio, right? So the Bruce Brown, they talked a lot about optionality. It was interesting to hear you report on the Patrick Williams thing. Like for the Raptors, I mean, it's not like Patrick Williams went for such a big number, really, when you think about it, 18 a year. I know he's been inconsistent, but I think you're pricing in sort of the improvement from a player who has a 3-and-D kind of model. To what degree, like, were the Raptors not willing to meet that price, or maybe Patrick Williams felt more comfortable staying in Chicago? Like, can you give me a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, my understanding was no matter what, Patrick Williams' preference was to stay with the Bulls.
Okay. All right.
And that if he was going to leave, he didn't want it to be a sign and trade either. So as much as that there was, I think, absolute, tangible, real, confirmed interest from the Raptor side of things, it never seemed like a preferred outcome for him. And I don't know off top of mind if Toronto could have figured out a way to have just had the space and done the quickly stuff after. But definitely the sign and trade was not something that Patrick Williams's people at Wasserman were hoping to accomplish. Yeah.
Fair enough. Any news on Gary or Gary Trent Jr. or, because it seems like, he's kind of just been floating out there for the last 2-3 years. And now he's a free agent. You're not hearing any news on him, or at least I'm not.
He's definitely been floating. Excuse me. There's all these wings from him to Haywood Highsmith to Caleb Martin to Buddy Hield, who all want either the full mid-level or above it, and they're waiting to see what happens with first Paul George, then KCP, and now the last domino there is Klay Thompson. Mm-hmm. So there's hope from all those guys that if Klay chooses Dallas, then the Lakers will start to come calling. If Klay chooses LA, then maybe the Mavs will start come calling. The Clippers were one of those teams too, but they just kind of locked up that slot with Derrick Jones Jr.
Right.
So the homes for those types of players are starting to dissolve on the board. And, for Gary, I do think there's a possibility he comes back in probably just a pure cap play of like, let's get this salary slot. Mm-hmm. And that's something we can, I could see him potentially getting, I could see his deal popping up on Raptors fans' phones and people looking at it as a bit of an overpay.
Sure.
But the chess behind those checkers is that, okay, well, if you pay him 10, that's a number that in theory you could use for something down the road. So that's kind of my feel on him right now.
Yeah, that was my popular theory is the Raptors should turn Gary essentially into the next Bruce Brown. Right? A lot of optionality, and you have a salary to trade. It's better than having no player and no salary. Okay, so we're going to move past the boring stuff because, quite frankly, Toronto is kind of sitting on the sidelines of free agency so far and probably will remain that way. Day one of free agency was relatively quiet until, I suppose, Paul George eventually signed overnight with the Sixers. But, how did this Paul George situation break down to this degree? Can you walk us through this one?
Yeah, I think, the Clippers statement that they put out is pretty emblematic of everything I've heard behind the scenes. And it's not that like the second apron is just, tax penalties and Steve Ballmer doesn't want to pay the bill. It's not that at all. Because if it was, Paul George would be with the Clippers and the Clippers would be moving into Intuit Dome with all their toilets and they'd be, the most expensive roster and they'd be all hunky-dory. Yeah. But the fact that if you're in the second apron for 3 out of 5 years, so starting this year, then the next year, then the year after that, because they would have been in the second apron for all 3 years of Kawhi's contract that he already signed and the 3 years that they were holding firm for. And from my understanding, held firm with that throughout all of this. They never went above the 3 years that they were offering. Mm-hmm. Those 3 years, once those guys were all off the books at 37 years old, the Clippers would have then been stuck in jail in second apron cap jail without the ability to get any better. Couldn't aggregate salaries into deals, couldn't sign and trade, don't have any mid-levels, can't use your trade exceptions, your draft pick is frozen and then moved to the back of the first round. Mm-hmm. The Clippers were hoping to avoid a scenario, and they did. they did, because now they're a first apron team and they have access to the mid-level and the biannual and all that. Their hope was to avoid a scenario where this old team full of guys with a lot of injury history just continue the next 3 years as the last 5 have of being a contender on paper, but never being healthy enough or it just never all coming together enough. And then you wake up in 2027 and realize you're absolutely screwed for the next 5 years and all these guys are retired. That, I think, was the ultimate context and the ultimate fear from LA as to why they weren't going to give Paul George more than 3 years, because they wanted to set themselves up to have the optionality to get out. I wrote about this at Yahoo sometime in the spring. I think it was before the combine, because my editor was like, hey, no one knows what the second apron shit means. Like, write something about it. I was like, okay, I'm not just going to do like a listicle. Let me call people and figure out how teams are approaching this. And the universal thing I learned was that all these teams are looking at it as, if you're going to go into the second apron, you can only do it for 2 out of 5. And you got to pick which 2. So like Boston right now, they're in it for these next 2. They should have a way to get out. Minnesota, they have a way to get out after Rudy Gobert's contract conveniently expires in 2 years and Mike Conley comes off the books, and now they have this rookie scale point guard and Rob Dillingham, in theory, who should be starting and making pennies compared to what your typical starting point guard, like compared to what Drew Holiday's making in Boston. He's going to be at 8, 10, whatever, he's going to be below the mid-level. So I think a lot of team building right now and for the foreseeable future is going to be very much positioning yourselves to have flexibility and optionality to get out of the apron almost as quickly as you got into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, like, the owners are probably the ones who pushed for this, right, when they wrote the last CBA, and obviously in conjunction with the Players Association. But it does very much feels like the CBA was kind of written for these, like, top-end teams. And I feel like, obviously, there's a lot more lower-end teams than there are top-end teams. And the incentive, I suppose, is to create more parity so that, you know, you can see more, player movement. You can see, again, more teams sort of cycling in and out. We've seen 6 new champions over the last 6 years at this point, year over year. But at the same time, though, it does kind of suck to see, like, teams like Denver, for example, just look at it and like, well, we just don't want to keep KCP for financial reasons. It's not like he's not a good fit or healthy or everything like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a situation that we're in. Last couple questions. Where's Klay going?
At this point, like I said, I think it sounds like it's between Dallas and Philly. I wouldn't discount. Oh, sorry, Dallas and the Lakers. Excuse me.
Okay, yeah.
I wouldn't discount Philly because they've got Paul Reed's $8 million non-guaranteed, and they could sign and trade or waive him or whatever. But it does seem like LA or Dallas is Klay's potential landing spots here.
Okay, all right. And then the other one is just, what are the Bucks and Heat doing while the rest of the Eastern Conference loads up here? Because, I mean, they got to be a little nervous, sweating and looking around at the rest of the teams and wondering what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is not to say I told you so, but there were a couple people I was talking to in the immediate aftermath of the Damian Lillard trade. And we were like, did the Bucks get worse? Ooh. And they don't. It's not just because of the drop off from Drew to Dame on the defensive side of the ball, because obviously the difference there, I think, could arguably be bigger on the offensive side of things. It was the loss of Grayson Allen too, because he was their second best perimeter defender behind Drew. And then it was all the picks. And then it was the fact that they're left with this aging roster where Brook Lopez, they spent, probably above market value to help to prevent him from fleeing to Houston. When the Rockets told Brook, if you take this deal we're giving you now a little bit more expensive in Milwaukee, they're just going to try to trade you next year, which is exactly what's happening. And I don't really see options of like look, this is something these are data points I've connected. If this is a Raptorsy thing.
Okay.
And this is just educated speculation. If the Warriors, Raptors, and Bucks figured out some 3-team trade where Wiggins went to Toronto and Bobby Portis and Connaughton went back to Golden State and Bruce Brown ends up in Milwaukee, does that really change anything for those 3 teams at all? I don't really think so. It's interesting.
Yeah, tangibly, not really, but yeah. I'd do it in Toronto. I'd do it. Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah.
So I say that to say, I don't really see a move on the board for the Bucks that's like dramatically better than Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis, or you break Brook Lopez into 2 50-cent coins that somehow equal more than $1 type thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Miami, they're in a position where both Haywood Highsmith and Caleb Martin are out on the open market right now, trying to find something above what Miami offered them. And I don't know if they're going to get it at this point.
We're talking like mid-level range? Like what are they looking for?
I think if Haywood Highsmith got the full mid-level, that would be considered a win from his side.
Sure.
Caleb Martin, my understanding, is looking for something closer to Tobias Harris, something in the 20 million AAV, which I think Detroit was a key possible spot for Caleb. And the fact that went to Tobias, I think that's a tough circumstance for Caleb Martin right now. But that being said, I don't know if Miami's going to be the best opportunity for those guys. And I don't think Caleb Martin wants to go back. I think he is determined to go get something on the open market. So we'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to be very interesting. I think if those 2 teams don't figure it out, then all of a sudden you'll start to see even more stars potentially hit, the point where they ask for trades or even hit the free agency. I mean, I would say so far these NBA finals were a little bit underwhelming. The draft was a little quiet, and then also free agency has been relatively quiet so far, I suppose, by NBA standards. But I definitely foresee bigger names becoming available as a result of their teams just quite frankly being unable to surround their teams with talent. Golden State, Milwaukee, Miami, these are teams that have been in the playoffs over and over again, but without the ability to improve their teams, they get older and older, and all of a sudden you got to sort of do what the Clippers are doing. But Jake, we appreciate you. We had actually just gotten a text from Dan Devine saying get back to work, so we'll let you do that. You can find all of Jake's work. He is Yahoo's senior NBA writer, of course, author of Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. We're looking at it right now. And host of the No Cap Room podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Jakob Fischer for all your free agency news. We appreciate you, Jake.
Thank you, guys.